Hello, friends. I am Chevee. Welcome to my shed. How are you today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? I hope it's fantastic and wonderful. Everything here is good. As I alluded to yesterday, I recorded a podcast session. It wasn't really an interview, a discussion on Monday, and that episode has released today, and there will be a link for it down in the description, and I'll probably pin a comment. And that podcast is Diner Discussions with Aaron and Allison. And I was Aaron and I talked for like an hour and a half or something, an hour and 40 minutes. I think we could have talked for hours, right? Like I felt it's a very discussion formatted podcast. It's not necessarily an question and answer type thing or an interview. It's more of just some people having a discussion, and I think Aaron and I could have just gone forever. Part of that reason is Aaron watches the show. So hi, Aaron. And so, as always happens in these situations, there are some of you that I know personally that we have met in person. We've chatted, we've talked, we've played games, that sort of thing, and we are friends. But there's a significant number of people who I don't know personally, but they know me very personally, right? Like, you know me way more personally than I know you. And so Aaron and I had that discussion about, he feels like he knows me. I had, didn't know him at all going into Monday's episode, and it was really good. It was a really good session, and, he's already said he'd like to have me back. He's on his third season, which is pretty impressive. And I think on that show we talked a little bit about the beginning of this show and why it happened, because he mentioned having this catalog of myself for my children and wanting me to extrapolate a little bit more on that. But one of the things we also mentioned was the Daily Shed itself, like where that came from, what that is. And I don't know. I've had a lot of discussions over the years about the origin story of this show, why it came to exist, how it came to exist. But I think one thing I've always forgot to mention is that this used to be a podcast. Like, this was a podcast. This was intended to be a podcast that I just happened to put on YouTube. And for the first like 60 or 80 or 100 episodes, some number of episodes, I produced both formats. It was available as both a podcast and on YouTube. And at some point over the years, I stopped doing the podcast because it got very, very, very little traction. It was just something that nobody was interested in. I don't think anybody's really interested in randomness every day. I mean, you guys are. But I think you come here more on a personal level than for a... you come here because you have grown with me, or you have seen my growth, or you have come here for inspiration. And again, it's not discoverable, really. Like, as I mentioned with Aaron, nobody's discovering this show on YouTube. Like, nobody is typing in a search and finding this, right? The people who come here because they know me, or because they've watched one of the videos that does well, like the time capsule video. It's really the only reason. So the podcast was even worse, right? Because there's, it's much harder to find a podcast than it is to find a channel on YouTube, in my opinion. Podcast players have come a long way, but back when this started, there really wasn't a good searchable podcast database, right? Like, you kind of had to post it to everything, including iTunes and all that other stuff, and hope that somebody found it. But anyway, going back to this. So we talked a bit about this particular thing I'm pointing at, this sign, which isn't a sign. It is the screen from when I silk screened t-shirts. I used to sell merch, and it was handmade. I handmade every shirt that I sold. That was really cool. And we talked about wearing our merch in public, and he talked about wearing his hat, his Diner Discussions hat, where he's, near where he's from, and somebody recognized it. They recognized the hat. They didn't recognize him because he's on a podcast. And I joked a little bit about my Daily Shed shirts because I would wear them, and I would often find somebody who wasn't aware that the Daily Shed was a quote, talk show, they thought that it was a weight loss thing, which I get, right? And so I don't think I've ever talked about the name of the show, where that came from, and there's a bit of a history there, I guess, that goes way, way back. One of my favorite blogs ever was posted on a board game, the Board Game Geek, a board gaming website, and that blog was called "Every Man Needs a Shed," and it was a gamer, a dad who talked about life, right? Like that was his whole thing, and the shed was the place that Dad could go to escape for a little bit. And Aaron and I joked about, Dad's going to the bathroom. Like that's the escape place. And I think moms do it too. Like going to the bathroom is the escape place. But having a shed is a place a man can go to escape. Was the kind of the concept behind the name of Every Man Needs a Shed. I don't necessarily subscribe to dang, every man needing a shed, but I think every person needs a shed. Everybody needs their space. Whatever that is. It could be literally a shed. It could be a corner where you have a desk or a reading nook or a gaming chair or a bedroom or whatever. Everybody needs a space. And this was my space. And what I found was I come through here every day to get to the house. I come through the garage door, go upstairs. And when this all started, I would kind of come in here and stop and do something every day. I would do a cleanup, put something away, I would make a new tool holder, I would do something. So it was becoming a daily routine to spend some time in the shed. And thus I decided that was going to be the name, like the Daily Shed. And I have talked about the duality of the name, meaning that I spend every day in my shed, but I also, this is more like I'm shedding the, like metaphorically or whatever. I don't know. This is my, some days I dump on you, right? Like it's a daily shed of whatever's in my head. And so we talked a bit about life. We talked about the kids. We talked about, old people stuff. I mean, Aaron's younger than me, but we talked about old people stuff, like stuff from the 80s and 90s. We talked a little bit about everything, and it was a really good experience. And he's asked me to come back. I told him anytime. I like talking, and I think that the format that he has for Diner Discussions is very similar to what you see here. So if you're interested in listening to what I had to say, or going back through 3 seasons of the catalog, follow the link and go give it a listen. I think it was a worthwhile experience. So today we have weather again in the area. The kids are home. They're here. I think they're going to go back to their mom's house this weekend at some point. So it's been weird. It's going to be weird, I should say, letting them go after 3.5 weeks or whatever it's been. But they need to spend time with their mom too, so duh. But I've had a wonderful time with them, and I'm going to probably just spend my weekend down here. I've got to finish these shelves and maybe make a router table. That's my next project, I think, because I want to complete some projects that I started a while ago that need a router table. And the best way to do that would be to make one. So, what are you up to this weekend? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for being here as always. Thank you for liking and commenting and subscribing. Being amazing people and wonderful friends, I really appreciate you. And I'll see you again on Monday. We're on the L's now. Today's word you should know to sound smart is labonotation. It is a noun meaning a nomenclature used to choreograph ballets, modern dance, and other performances so the dancers can follow the steps. Even with the best available labonotation, Walker was unable to adequately perform a Viennese waltz at Natasha's coming out party. Labonotation. Labanotation. That's interesting. Is that like... I mean, would square dance be a version of that? Labonotation?